Hi, my name is Chris, aka The Philosopher's Games, and today we talk about the end of the Third Age and the War of the Ring. We will continue right where we stopped last time without an introduction. I have to admit, this part feels quite strange, because it's the last part of this project and I have to leave details out instead of bringing more details in, because the Lord of the Rings story is just far too massive for one video. So focus on things that are less known and skip over the main story quite a bit. Also, I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it, and also shout outs to the artists who allowed me to use their fantastic artworks like Kimberly80, Ted Naismith, Jenny Dolphin, and Sara Morello. Also, spoiler warning. There are, however, some interesting notes about the west gate of Moria, which are the doors of Durin. In Unfinished Tales we find an explanation why Gollum could not open the gate. Some might think, me included until recently, because he did not know the password, but Tolkien wrote, to him they would seem huge and immovable, and though they had no lock or bar and opened outwards to a thrust, he did not discover that. In note 12 we can further read that the doors were made in a way that only two dwarfs pushing could open them from inside, or one very strong dwarf. This would also mean that Aragorn and Gandalf were strong enough to open them alone from the inside when they traveled through Moria. So at this time Gandalf did not need to know the password. Gollum, in contrast, had trouble finding the way through Moria and also had no food, so he was quite weak when he arrived at the West Gate and could not have opened it even if he knew. This indicates that Oin knew about it as well. The mechanism was designed like this by the dwarves, so nobody could easily escape, and there was always, at the time of Moria's glory, at least one door guard there. I also found an interesting note that Gollum's reason to escape through Moria was that the terror of the Nazgul, of which some resided in Dol Guldur, made him dare to hide in Moria. In the meantime, earlier that year, at the 1st of May, 3rd Age 3018, Gandalf met Aragorn in Sarnford, as he explains in the chapter Strider. The leader of the Rangers further mentions that he came west, so over the Misty Mountains I assume, with Gandalf in spring, and that their last meeting was at Sarnford, shortly after Gandalf revealing to Frodo that Bilbo's ring was indeed the One Ring. Interestingly, Sarnford was named after Sarn-Athrad from Beleriand, meaning stony fort by the Númenóreans, as half-translation. Sarn-Athrad was, for example, where Hales and her people defended against orcs until Caranthir, one of Feanor's sons, came to help. Fun fact, Hales was the sister of Tuor's great-great-great-grandfather, so Elrond and Aragorn were actually related to her. The plan was that Gandalf would leave for Rivendell in the last week of September. Strider explains further, as I knew he was at your side, I went away on a journey of my own. The circumstances around this would cause a lot of trouble though, also this was one of the few mentions of Sarnford. A bit later in Gondor, around the 19th of June, 3rd Age 3018, Faramir started to have the same dream multiple times, and one time also Boromir had that dream, which included a mysterious rhyme. Seek for the sword that was broken, in Imladris it dwells, there shall be counsels taken, stronger than Morgul's spells, there shall be shown a token, that doom is near at hand, for Isildur's bane shall waken, and the halfling forth shall stand. Interestingly, Sauron's attack on Osgiliath to distract the enemy so the Nazgul could cross the river in secret was just a day later. Boromir and Faramir counseled with their father, Denethor II, who explains, Imladris was of old the name among the elves of a far northern dale, where Elrond the half-elven dwelt, greatest of lawmasters. Boromir also later says in the council, the might of Elrond is in wisdom, not in weapons, it is said, which implies quite some respect for Elrond, though they clearly do not know where Rivendell was exactly. The dream or vision resulted in Boromir trying to find Imladris and traveling there, though Faramir wanted to go instead, and also Denethor would give leave to his oldest son only unwillingly, but Boromir wanted to take this dangerous journey upon himself and left Minas Tirith at the 4th of July. Of this journey we know that Boromir must have met Eomer in Rohan and lent, I assume, a fresh horse from him, which he must have lost around Tharbad. It then returned to Rohan, as Eomer later explains. In this time, messages about the events in Gondor and a black shadow reached Gandalf. When he met some fugitives from the south, he noticed that a strange fear was upon them, of which they would not speak. He also noticed a danger that drew near. In his unrest, he traveled along the Greenway until he suddenly met someone at Midyear's Day, Radagast the Brown. Gandalf explained in the council that Radagast was never a traveler except in great need. Here the Brown Wizard would warn Gandalf about the Nazgul having crossed the river and moving westward. He also revealed that he had this information from Saruman and that Gandalf should visit him in Orthanc immediately. Both still trusted Saruman at this point, which is why Gandalf asked Radagast to tell all birds and beasts that were his friends to bring news to Gandalf and Saruman, especially to Orthanc, to which Radagast agreed. Before the Grey Wizard travelled to Saruman, he went to Bree and gave Barleyman Butterbur a letter which the inn owner should send to Frodo Baggins. From there he went to Isengard, which Gandalf later called his greatest mistake. Here Saruman revealed to him his treachery and asked him to join his cause, which Mithrandir refused, leading to his imprisonment at the top of Orthanc and causing the problem that Frodo was now completely on his own. Due to Radagast sending Gwaihir to Isengard with news, as Gandalf asked him to do, the faithful Istar would be found by the Great Eagle and could escape. So, by accident, the Brown Wizard helped the good cause of the Grey Wizard. Here things now get complicated with the exact events happening in the background, because Tolkien wrote several different versions of it, published in Unfinished Tales in the chapter The Hunt for the Ring, called A, B and C. And then there's also Text D, talking a bit about Gollum. Text A is the most complete text of them. How canon these texts are is debatable, but they are indeed very nice additions. The information of Aragorn bringing Gollum to Thranduil is also from here. In Text A, the Nazgul from Minas Morgul, led by the Witch King, after they crossed the Anduin and got their horses and cloaks at the west shores of Anduin, a little north of Sarngibir, first travelled to the field of Celebrand, meeting there with the Nazgul stationed in Dol Guldur, and here learn from Camul, the ringwraith stationed there, that Gollum escaped and that, quote, no dwellings of halflings could be discovered in the vales of Anduin, and that the villages of the Sturs by the Gladden had long been deserted. Still, the Witch King decided to go there again and further ride north, trying to find the Shire there, but he found nothing. Here we have our first difference to another text. In Text B, the mentioned village of the Sturs is not deserted, and the remaining halflings are slain or driven away by the Nazgul. Then the Nazgul returned empty-handed and got a message from Sauron, who learned, I guess, from his spies about Boromir's prophetic dream and that Gandalf was captured by Saruman. As a result, the ringwraiths were sent with speed, abandoning their secrecy to Isengard to learn what Saruman knew. When they arrived, they halted at the gate. Gandalf already escaped 2 days ago, and Saruman lied to them and used his voice to convince even the Witch King. Interestingly, we can read, the Witch King received only the answer of the voice of Saruman, that spoke by some art as though it came from the gate itself. Saruman sent them after Gandalf, who was in Rohan, and due to the power of his voice, the Nazgul did not question his advice. Also, here Text C is different, we come back to this in a moment. Riding back south, they unfortunately met Grima Wormtongue and questioned him. In fear and wanting to save his life, Grima told them everything, also where the Shire was. Now the Nazgul also knew that Saruman was a traitor, and they rode north to the Shire. In Sarnford and surroundings, they met some resistance of the Dúnedain Rangers, but without Aragorn they could not defend against the terror of the Nazgul. Some were slain, others managed to escape, but ultimately the Nazgul reached the Shire. Now in Text C, this story is quite a bit different. The Ringwraiths arrived in Isengard when Gandalf was still there. Saruman asked them to wait while he pretended to interrogate Gandalf with the intention to ask him for forgiveness and ally with him against Mordor again, but he noticed that the Grey Wizard had just escaped with the help of the Great Eagle. He knew he was screwed. Now there was no way back nor a way forth. He knew that with Gandalf's escape and a lot of fortune on the Grey Wizard's side, there was an actual chance for Sauron losing at the end, but he betrayed Gandalf and his original quest. He also betrayed Sauron by hiding information about the Shire, which he studied in secret and established spies there already, as we can read in texts published in the chapter as well, because he wanted the One Ring for himself. Saruman knew about the Shire for a long time. So his solution was to still get the One Ring for himself. He told the Nazgul in Text C that he learned from Gandalf where the Shire was and told them its location, hiding that he knew it all along. He speculated that the Shire was well guarded and the ring must already be on its way to a safe place like Rivendell, so this would cost the Nazgul time. In a way, he overestimated Gandalf, and as we know, the Nazgul got very close to the One Ring. With this hint from Saruman, the Ringwraiths saw him still as an ally, but on their way to the Shire, they found, instead of Grima, the squint-eyed southerner at Dune Landing, who was a spy of Saruman, and interrogated him. To save his life and by putting the shadow of fear on him, the Nazgul learned all the spy knew, who also had notes and maps of the Shire for Saruman in his possession, including the names of the big families and in which areas they were living. Suddenly, Hobbiton got pretty high on the list of places to check early. This also unveiled Saruman's treachery towards Sauron, because he withheld these information. Of course, the Dune Landing would not tell Saruman what happened to him, and now spied for the Witch King. Date-wise, Text C fits quite well to Appendix B, but I like Text A the most because it builds up Saruman's and Grima's relationship more, and Saruman seems even more arrogant and pride here. After that, and according to Text B I think, the Witch King set up a camp west of the Barrow Downs and sent his Nazgul to the Shire with the order to split up and be stealthy again. In the meantime, the Witch King himself visited the Barrow Downs for some days and roused the Barrow Wilds. We can further read, and all things of evil spirit hostile to elves and men were on the watch with malice in the old forest and on the Barrow Downs. They also had an eye on Bree. Here now began the main events of The Lord of the Rings, which I won't cover in all the detail because I could talk just about the way from Back End to Rivendell for 10 hours, which I actually did in my Film and Book Differences series. Link is in the description. I also assume we all know the fundamental story of The Lord of the Rings quite well, so focus on the parts about Elrond and his allies here and some interesting details people might not be aware of. Gwaihir flew Gandalf to Theoden in Edoras and was allowed to take any horse if he would just leave ASAP. From there Gandalf travelled to the Shire as fast as he could, but he had to convince Shadowfax first. Though with Gandalf not returning to Frodo in time as promised, and Butterbur forgetting to deliver Gandalf's letter, Frodo sold Back End to Lobelia and moved to Crickhollow with the help of his friends at the 23rd of September. From there they would leave the Shire. On the day they left Back End, after celebrating Frodo's birthday with a few friends, Sam's father Gaffer was also approached by the Nazgul Khamul and asked for Baggins. In the meantime, an elf of the Noldor named Gildor Inglorion, I assume that he himself lived in Rivendell or around as well, led a group of elves from Rivendell to the Tower Hills, visiting Elostirion, one of the towers there, to look through the Palantir stored in it. The Seeing Stone could look over the ocean to the west continent Aman, which the elves would sail to one day and wanted to look upon at times, maybe even seeing the Vala Elbares, the angelic entity who kindled the stars, in a vision. This was some kind of elven pilgrimage, according to the songbook The Road Goes Ever On. At the time of Frodo leaving Bag End, these elves were on their way back to Rivendell. Around Gildor Inglorion, many theories exist because he was from the house of Finrod and Inglorion means son of Inglor. In newer versions, Finrod, Felagund, was the name of Galadriel's brother, but in old versions, including the time when Lord of the Rings was originally published, Finrod was the name of Galadriel's father, which later was renamed to Finarfin. However, Inglor was also used as the name for Finrod Felagund, who was called Inglor Felagund. It is also the Sindarin translation of Finarfin's mother name, Ingalaure. So if Gildor is related, he could be another brother of Galadriel or the son of Galadriel's brother Finrod Felagund. Some speculate about an oversight or old leftover of Tolkien here in some way. Another possibility is of course that Inglor was simply an independent character from the household of Finrod Felagund and Gildor was a son who stayed in Middle-earth. Frodo, Sam and Pippin travel to Crickhollow and one of the Nazgul almost captured them on their way, but by chance or purpose they ran into Gildor Inglorion and his company, which saved them. This was at the 24th of September and Gildor was on his way back to Rivendell. From here, Frodo, Sam and Pippin continue their journey and met Farmer Maggot, who was also visited by one of the Nazgul a short time before, but the farmer asked him to get lost, even though he offered Maggot gold. The farmer then later helped Frodo and his friends, gave them food and drink, and even brought them to the Buckleberry Ferry himself, where they met Merry. From there they went to Crickhollow and left the Shire through the Old Forest, where they got in trouble with Old Man Willow and are saved by Tom Bombadil, almost get killed by the Barrow-wights but are rescued by Tom again, and then finally reach Bree. Tom also gave them the blades of the now cleansed Barrow Downs, which are often called Barrow Blades, and were forged by the Dúnedain of Cardolan for the war against Angmar. In the meantime, Gildor must have met Aragorn on his way, quote, "The tidings had gone far and wide that Gandalf was missing, and the horsemen had been seen. It was the elven folk of Gildor that told me this, and later they told me that you had left your home, but there was no news of your leaving Buckland." Gildor then travelled further to Rivendell and notified Elrond of what happened. In the meantime, Gandalf convinced Shadowfax to help him and they rode as fast as possible to Hobbiton over Sarnford. When Frodo reached Bree and met Strider, Gandalf reached Hobbiton and talked to Sam's father, Gaffer. Here we also learn that Butterbur forgot to send the letter to Frodo and that Gandalf wanted Frodo to leave the Shire at the end of July and not at the end of September. So Frodo would have been in Rivendell when the Black Riders were still searching north of the Gladden Fields for the Shire. From Bree, Frodo and his friends are led to Weathertop by Strider, while Gandalf rides to Crickhollow, Bree and then to Weathertop as well, waiting for Frodo there, also leaving a secret message on a stone. Then one night the Black Riders attack the Grey Wizard and he fights against them, quote, "I was hard put to it indeed. Such light and flame cannot have been seen on Weathertop since the war beacons of old." Frodo and his friends also saw this light on Weathertop or Amon Sul in the distance. As Frodo lay tired but unable to close his eyes, it seemed to him that far away there came a light in the eastern sky. It flashed and faded many times. Gandalf, fighting the Nazgul, decided to draw them away and rode very far to the northeast towards the Etten Moors, where he had to send Shadowfax away because he couldn't cross the terrain there. He managed to draw 4 of the 9 riders away from Weathertop, but unfortunately not all of them, and so 5 remained close to Amon Sul, including the Witch King. Those 5 attacked Frodo and his friends at the night at the 6th of October, and the Witch King managed to stab Frodo. In the book, when the Nazgul approached and attacked him, the Hobbit managed to call for the Vala Elbereth, Queen of Stars, and even swing his barrow blade against the Witch King, but only cutting his cloak, which led to the ringwraith missing Frodo's heart with a stab of his Morgul blade, and only pierced Frodo's shoulder, which saved him in the end. This night, many powers were at work to make this outcome possible. Also, Strider had no fear. As a result, the Nazgul had no power over him, and he could fend them off with a burning branch. The combination of fearless Strider, Frodo resisting, calling for Elbereth, having and using a barrow blade, which were one of the few weapons that could seriously hurt a ringwraith, them only being 5 and it being full moon, made the 5 Black Riders retreat for the moment. Around this time, Gildor, or his messenger, must have reached Rivendell, as mentioned, and at the 9th of October, Elrond sends out powerful elf lords, including Glorfindel, in all directions west of Rivendell, to find and help Frodo and his friends. Elrond also learned that Gandalf was missing, who also will only arrive in Rivendell at the 18th of October. He had to walk all the way south from the Etten Moors to Rivendell. With the help of Glorfindel, who once sacrificed himself battling a Balrog to save the refugees of Gondolin, including Elrond's grandparents and father, and his horse Asphalos, Frodo managed to reach Rivendell, and the Black Riders got washed away by a flood summoned by Elrond and enhanced by Gandalf. In the Peter Jackson films, Arwen replaced Glorfindel's role here. In the books, Frodo also rides alone on Asphalos to Rivendell. In Rivendell at the 20th of October, he is saved and healed by Elrond, who is not only known as one of the greatest lore masters of this time, but also as one of the greatest healers. In addition, he had Vilya, the mightiest of the 3 elven rings of power. Quote, "Those who made them did not desire strength or domination or hoarded wealth, but understanding, making, and healing to preserve all things unstained." Healing in this context also means to heal the world itself a bit. When Frodo awoke at the 24th of October, Boromir arrived in Rivendell, and the next day the Council of Elrond was held. Also some time before, Glóin and Gimli must have arrived as well. The exact date is not clear though. They came to Rivendell because Erebor, under King Dóin, was visited by a Black Rider a year before the council, offering the dwarves the realm of Moria and the remaining 3 of the 7 rings of power if they got Bilbo's ring and gave it to Sauron, or other rich reward for information where the hobbits lived. He also came to Dale and talked to King Brand, and the rider returned 2 times already, and at the end of the year he would return for the last time. Signs of war could already be spotted at the eastern borders. But the dwarves would not betray Bilbo and were now looking for advice and help. The Council of Elrond chapter is often quoted in my videos, and for example, what happened to Gandalf was also explained in it. It's a great source. Many of its information we already covered to this point. We learned that Saruman is a traitor, a lot about the law and recent events, that the One Ring must be destroyed and that there's only one way for it. Also, Elrond's messengers could not find Radagast, Legolas traveled to Rivendell to report that Gollum escaped, and Círdan sent Galdor from the Havens to represent him. In the council, the Fellowship of the Ring was established with 9 companions to counter the 9 Nazgul, and also Narsil was reforged into Andúril, the Flame of the West. Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. The Fellowship left Rivendell at the 25th of December on their quest to destroy the One Ring in the fires of Mount Doom. Gimli and Legolas offered their service and were chosen by Elrond as companions. They should also not swear oaths. Elrond, though, was against Merry and Pippin joining, and especially against the young Hobbit, but Gandalf convinced him, and the Hobbit made it clear that Elrond would need to imprison him otherwise, and so the Elf Lord agreed. Though later, through their journey, Pippin questioned if it was a good idea. So does Gimli, but in the end it was a good decision, though impossible to foresee. Elrond originally planned to send them as messengers to the Shire, preparing it for what might come. For their dangerous journey, they had to cross the Misty Mountains first, which they tried over the Redhorn Pass, but are repelled there by the snow and storm. They could hear fell voices in the wind, and it can be assumed that some power was at work here, though the Misty Mountains were once raised by Morgoth to block the approaching Vala Orome, and always were a location of evil and misfortune. They returned and took a different path that led through Moria, which in the book was Gandalf's idea, and the Gap of Rohan they wanted to avoid. To go through Moria, they needed to send Bill the Pony back and solve the riddle of the doors of Durin. Gollum already waited at the west gate inside of Moria. It is in a way interesting that much of the lore we discussed in the past sections, the Fellowship will discover now. The grave of Balin and the last notes of Ori in the chamber of Mazarbul, including fighting the Watcher in the water outside of Moria, who once killed Oin. That the Bane of Durin is indeed a Balrog of Morgoth, and Gandalf later even found the Endless Stair. The confrontation with Durin's Bane also led to Gandalf's fall and continued fight in the depths to the top of the Misty Mountains. He even saw nameless things below the earth. After he killed the Balrog 10 days after he fell, the wizard died as well and was revived as Gandalf the White, who was picked up again by Gwaihir and brought to Lothlorien. The Great Eagle noticed that Gandalf in his new form had basically no weight. Gandalf was sent back by Eru, and the Great Eagles were servants of Manwë, who understood Eru's will the best. This gave the Istar now an extraordinary authority for his further mission, for example allowing him to destroy Saruman's staff later and replacing him. When Gandalf arrived in Lothlorien and gets a new staff and clothes, the Fellowship already departed from there with their gifts from Galadriel. For the gift to Aragorn, Tolkien wrote an interesting story, actually two, published in Unfinished Tales. In the first version, the elf stone, the Elessar, which had healing abilities, was made by the jewelsmith Enerthil from Gondolin and given to Idril, grandmother of Elrond in the First Age. Due to this, it survived the fall of Gondolin and was later given to Idril's son Eärendil, who was the father of Elrond and Elros. So after the War of Wrath, the jewel remained on the west continent, Aman, and was much later brought back to Middle-earth by Gandalf, who gave it to Galadriel with a prophecy that she would not keep it for long and that she will give it to someone who shall be called Elessar. This fits very well to what we find in Lord of the Rings, when Galadriel talks to Aragorn. This stone I gave to Celebrian, my daughter, and she to hers, Arwen, and now it comes to you as a token of hope. In this hour take the name that was foretold for you, Elessar, the elf stone of the house of Elendil. Interestingly, in a note of Tolkien regarding Appendix A, published in the foreword of Peoples of Middle-earth, we find the information that Ivorwen, Aragorn's grandmother by his mother's side, foretold, "But I see on his breast a green stone, and from that his true name shall come, and his chief renown, for he shall be a healer and a renewer." So there are in the notes of Tolkien multiple possibilities for the origin of that mentioned prophecy. In the mentioned second version, it's completely different. There is no prophecy, and the original elf stone made by Inerðil remained in Aman, and Celebrimbor made a new one for Galadriel that she then gave to her daughter, and so on. I like version 1 a lot more, to be honest. Also, I don't know when exactly Arwen gave the gem back to Galadriel. In parallel, Gollum follows the Fellowship, though he does not enter Lothlorien, and in an interesting note published in The Lord of the Rings, A Reader's Companion, we learn that Gollum was captured and questioned by a troop of Saruman's Uruk-hai under Ugluk. Gollum revealed that hobbits traveled with Gandalf and that they also had the ring. He then somehow escaped from the orcs. A few days later, the 25th of February, the first battle of the forts of Isen took place. Saruman attacked Rohan from Isengard with a purpose to kill Theoden's son Theodred at all costs, in which they succeeded. It becomes not clear in the films, but when Theoden asks, "Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell?" he most likely refers to this battle where his son was slain. Saruman knew that the biggest hurdles to conquer Rohan were Theodred and Eomer, according to the chapter The Battles of the Forts of Isen in Unfinished Tales. Through Grima, he tried to drive a wedge between the two. The White Wizard sent his orcs and allied Dunlendings to the forts of Isen on both sides of the river, and even though Rohan expected the attack, it was still successful in the end, at least with the goal to slay Theodred. But Saruman also paid a high price for this, because he lost many orcs in this bold attack, and then let the orcs retreat after completing this task. As a result, Rohan still held the forts of Isen after it. Also, thanks to the valor of the commanders Elfhelm and Grimbold and their men, Tolkien comments that Saruman not focusing on winning the battle itself and not taking the forts to start the invasion from here was a great mistake. Around this time, 25th of February, the Fellowship passed the Argonas, which then led to the breaking of the Fellowship and the death of Boromir. Since we know this part quite well, I would focus on some movements in the background instead that will lead to the Battle of the Hornburg. Saruman's orcs and Dunlendings later overran the forts of Isen in the second battle, where Grimbold tried to defend those against the enemy. His fellow commander Elfhelm was against that idea, defending the forts. His friend was right, but Grimbold managed to retreat and scatter his troops, though they had for sure quite some losses. However, this way there were still a lot of survivors. Though it felt inglorious for Grimbold, it was the right decision because the troops will be needed in the Battle of the Hornburg. Some troops retreated to the Hornburg, or Hornburg if you pronounce it Old English, which Lord Erkenbrand manned and stored. Others were scattered in the land. He then left the Hornburg to gather those other scattered troops and all other troops he could find, which took him 3 days, longer than he expected. He also sent the messenger Ceorl to Eomer, who was arrested in Edoras by Grima because he pursued the orcs against the orders of Edoras, which definitely helped Merry and Pippin, who will then meet the Ents. In the meantime, Theoden was healed from Grima's influence and, I assume, poison by Gandalf at the 2nd of March. Eomer was put back to duty and they were now on their way with troops to fight at the forts of Isen. On their way, they met Ceorl, who told them about the loss at the forts of Isen and the gathering in the Hornburg. This and Gandalf's advice made Theoden abandon his original plan and also retreat to the stronghold, which then led to the Battle of the Hornburg. Gandalf, when they met Ceorl, left and went on a mission of his own to find the remaining troops. The wizard with Erkenbrand and Grimbold made it in time to break the siege of the Hornburg and defeat Saruman's forces, while Elfhelm defended Edoras. In the books, Edoras was not evacuated to Helm's Deep, only the people of the Westfold. After this, they went to Isengard, which was defeated by the Ents with Merry and Pippin, to talk to Saruman and get the Palantir. Next, Aragorn meets the Grey Company, that were 30 Dúnedain rangers of the north, led by Halbarad and accompanied by Elrond's sons Eladan and Elrohir, who were all clad in grey. The two half-elven lords had a message for Aragorn from Elrond to consider the prophecy of Malbeth, the seer, especially the line, "He shall pass the door of the paths of the dead." The company was established due to Halbarad receiving a mysterious message. Legolas later concludes that Galadriel was responsible for that. They came to aid Aragorn, and they also walked with him through the paths of the dead, where they found the remains of Baldur, Prince of Rohan, who went there once alone and died. At the Stone of Erech, Aragorn summoned the Oath Breakers, and they accepted his offer, which helped Aragorn defeat the men and corsairs of Umbar and men from Harad by making them flee in terror, which also included the Gondorian defenders at times. This way, Aragorn also gathered further troops on his way to Minas Tirith, like those of Lord Angbor the Fearless, who was the only one in that region who had no fear of the Oathbreakers. In parallel, the beacons were lit and the red arrow was delivered to Theoden by the Gondorian messenger Hirgon, and so the king moved to help his old ally, fulfilling the old oath between Gondor and Rohan, moving through the valley of the Druedain. Sadly, Hirgon and his companion were slain on their way back to Minas Tirith. After the defeat of Saruman, the Two Towers book focuses on Frodo and Sam, though a lot of these events happen in parallel, from the taming of Gollum and his oath to Frodo, through the Dead Marshes to the Black Gate, to meeting Faramir and the Forbidden Pool, and even through Shelob's lair. Here the Phial of Galadriel becomes handy, which has the light of the Star of Eärendil in it, which is one of the 3 Silmarilli worn by Elrond's father Eärendil on his flying ship Vingilot, which can be seen as bright star in the sky. Shelob's mother Ungoliant once devoured the 2 trees of Valinor, whose light is stored in the Silmarilli. She also almost devoured the Silmarilli themselves, but Sauron's master Morgoth withheld those from her, breaking his promise. In the end, Morgoth was almost eaten by Ungoliant, but could be rescued by his Balrogs in time, who he alerted with a powerful scream. Here, this First Age story comes to an end when Sam blinds Shelob with the phial, emitting the light her mother Ungoliant once wanted to destroy, and wounds her with Sting. Sam also had the ring for some time and even saved Frodo in the Tower of Kiris Ungol. Soon after this, Sauron started his war effort and attacked Lothlorien from Dol Guldur, which was able to defend itself quite well. Osgiliath, the old capital of Gondor, was also attacked, and Faramir retreated and is saved by Gandalf, but is sent back to the ruined city by his father Denethor II again, where he was wounded when he had to retreat again, and is only saved by Prince Imrahil from Dol Amros. Meanwhile, Sauron also attacks Dale with Easterlings, where the men of the city fight together with the dwarves of Erebor under King Duin to defend their homes. Duin is already 252 years old, which is very old for a dwarf, even from Durin's direct line. It is interesting that he started battle when he was considered a very young dwarf with around 32 years, killing Azog, and then have his potential last battle with 252 years at the very end of his life. He fought alongside Bard's descendant King Brand. At the same time, Lothlorien again, and in addition Thranduil's woodland realm, were attacked from Dol Guldur, but they could still defend themselves quite well. Also, the siege of Minas Tirith began, where the gate of Minas Tirith was destroyed by Grond, and Denethor II died to his madness and despair. The siege was then broken when Theoden arrived and attacked the armies of Sauron in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, bringing many sacrifices, including Theoden being mortally wounded by an attack of the Witch King and his winged steed. Eomer's sister Eowyn protected her dying uncle and slew the Witch King with the help of Merry and his barrow blade he got from Tom Bombadil. Quote, "No other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt that foe a wound so bitter." Still, the fight continued and the Haradrim and their Olifants, or Mumakil, became a problem for the defenders. And then also the ships of the Corsairs arrived, and all seemed lost. This was one of the visions Denethor II had, driving him into absolute despair. But out of the ships came Aragorn with the Grey Company, Legolas, Gimli, Eladan, Elrohir, and some of the forces of the southern fiefs and cities of Gondor, with more on their way led by Angbor. This turned the battle and led to the defeat of Sauron's forces, ending his biggest attack on the free peoples of Middle-earth so far. After it, they searched the battlefield for survivors, and healing the wounded, where Aragorn assisted, became the highest priority. In Dale, Doin Ironfoot, wielding his weapons still with might despite his high age, was defending the body of King Brand until he was slain in battle as well, and Erebor was besieged. But Dale and Erebor were not defeated. Would they have lost, the Easterling forces could have helped Sauron's forces in Gondor, and things would have become grim there. Also, there is a third assault on Lothlorien without success. Gandalf understood, though, that Mordor still had more to offer. If Sauron would get the One Ring, he would win anyway. So he advised of gathering one big force and attack Mordor at the Black Gate to empty these cursed lands and draw Sauron's attention at them, which would allow Frodo and Sam to get through Mordor easier and destroy the One Ring in the fires of Mount Doom. To this plan all agreed, knowing it could be their death, but it was their only hope. At the Black Gate they negotiated with the mouth of Sauron, and then the Battle of the Morannon began. As we know, Frodo and Sam, but also Gollum, managed to reach Samath Naur in Mount Doom, but could not destroy the One Ring. This task was impossible for a mere mortal. Gollum fought with Frodo over the One Ring and bit off the ring-bearer's finger. He was finally united with his precious again, ignoring his oath that he gave Frodo, swearing it on the One Ring. Smeagol will swear on the precious. Frodo even warned him. It will hold you, but it is more treacherous than you are. It may twist your words. Gollum ignored the warning. Smeagol will swear never, never to let him have it. Never. Smeagol will save it, but he must swear on the precious. And I will serve the master of the precious. Later, Frodo reminded him again when Gollum suggested to give him the ring back. You swore a promise by what you call the precious. Remember that. It will hold you to it, but it will seek a way to twist it to your own undoing. And if I, wearing it, were to command you, you would obey, even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into the fire. And such would be my command. So have a care, Smeagol. It can also be assumed that by leading Frodo to Shelob, he tried to get around breaking his promise due to Shelob potentially killing Frodo. In the end, Gollum could not endure it anymore and attacked Frodo, and then another power took over. Tolkien expresses this in letter 192. Few others, possible no others of his time, would have got so far. The other power then took over, the writer of the story, by which I do not mean myself. Eru, that is God, accepted the oath of Gollum, and breaking it turned out to be fatal. Gollum danced in happiness, being reunited with his precious above the fires of Mount Doom, but stumbled and fell into the fire with the One Ring. Also, Gandalf prophesied, "My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end." With this, Sauron was finally defeated, reduced to a mere shadow, not able to take form ever again, and Barad-dûr was destroyed. This was at the 25th of March. Bard II and Thorin III Stonehelm defeated the enemies in Dale. They also followed their fathers as kings afterwards. Eomer succeeded Theoden already on the battlefield. Celeborn came forth and led the host of Lorien over Anduin in many boats. They took Dol Guldur, and Galadriel threw down its walls and laid bare its pits, and the forest was cleansed. Celeborn and Thranduil met, and Mirkwood was renamed in Erin Lascalen, the wood of green leaves. Thranduil ruled the northern half, and the southern half was ruled by Celeborn and became East Lorien. After the destruction of the One Ring, Gandalf asked the great eagles Gwaihir, Landroval, and Mineldor to fly them to Mount Doom, where they saved Frodo and Sam. To rest and recover, they were brought to the camp in the fields of Cormallen, where Frodo and Sam were also celebrated and praised. Now follows the coronation of Aragorn at the 1st of May after he was recognized as king. He healed many in the houses of healing after the battle of the Pelennor fields, though wishing Elrond was there to help. He had at least his close friends, almost brothers, the sons of Elrond, Eladan and Elrohir, with him. For it is said in old lore, the hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so the rightful king could ever be known. In addition, he also had the Elf Stone, which had healing powers in the mentioned 2 texts from Unfinished Tales. Frodo brought the crown to Gandalf, and Gandalf, as a representative of the Valar, so to say, crowned the king. At that time, Arwen and Elrond left Rivendell, traveling to Gondor and visiting Lothlorien and Edoras on the way. Remember the dialogues between Elrond and Aragorn. But there will be no choice before Arwen, my beloved, unless you, Aragorn, Arathorn's son, come between us and bring one of us, you or me, to a bitter parting beyond the end of the world. You do not know yet what you desire of me. Therefore, though I love you, I say to you, Arwen Undomiel shall not diminish her life's grace for less cause. She shall not be the bride of any man less than the king of both, Gondor and Arnor. To me, then, even our victory can bring only sorrow and parting, but to you, hope of joy for a while. Aragorn fulfilled the almost impossible task Elrond gave him, like Beren once did, and to which Aragorn's and his line's fate was bound. He also got yet a new name, from Estelle to Thorongil to Strider to Aragorn, and now he is King Elisar, and his house is called Tekontar, the House of Strider. With Gandalf's help, he also finds a new sapling of the White Tree on Mindolluin, which was also the sign the king awaited. The new sapling was planted, and the old White Tree carefully uprooted and laid to rest in the silence of Ras Dinen, I assume in the tomb of the kings of Gondor. Faramir and his house could also keep the office as stewards of Gondor, and he became Prince of Ithilien as well, marrying Eowyn, who he fell in love with in the houses of healing. The king also pronounced his judgments over many that came before him or were brought before him. He showed mercy towards the Dunelandings who surrendered and made peace with Harad. He also gave the slaves of Mordor the lands about Lake Nurnen. Close to the mid-year's day, Arwen and her family and companions reached Gondor, and on mid-year's day, King Elisar and Arwen finally married, and Elrond gave him the scepter of Anúminas, which he withheld from him until he would become king. With this he was also king of Arnor, you could say. Aragorn fulfilled Elrond's task that he gave him many decades ago, but it would also bring a bitter parting beyond the end of the world for Elrond now. I think he knew and hoped that this would happen. Elrond wanted to see Sauron defeated and the peoples of Middle-earth to be free from the Dark Lord and his evil, as much as everyone else of his allies, family and friends, and he loved Aragorn like a son and wanted to see him happy as well, but it did cost him a high price, to maybe never see his daughter again, maybe only beyond the end of the world when Arda was made anew, there would be a chance. A weird moment for him in his life, both happy and crushingly sad. The last sacrifice he had to make. As said, Arwen Undomiel shall not diminish her life's grace for less cause. And what higher cause could there be than the defeat of Sauron? Still, this sacrifice, if that is the right word, was something that also brought sadness into his heart. I think Hugo Weaving hits the expression quite well when bringing his daughter to Aragorn for the wedding. Arwen's decision was then also underlined by giving a special gift to Frodo later, quote, "But the Queen Arwen said, 'A gift I will give you, for I am the daughter of Elrond. I shall not go with him now when he departs to the havens, for mine is a choice of Luthien, and as she, so have I chosen both the sweet and the bitter. But in my stead you shall go, ring-bearer, when the time comes, and if you then desire it. If your hurts grieve you still and the memory of your burden is heavy, then you may pass into the west until all your wounds and wearinesses are healed. But wear this now in memory of Elfstone and Evenstar, with whom your life has been woven." And she also gave Frodo her necklace with a white gem, which I think is referenced in the Peter Jackson films because the Elfstone, the Elisar of Aragorn, is actually green. This was at around the 15th of July, and 7 days later the funeral escort of King Theoden sets out to Edoras. Theoden's body rested for the time in the tombs of kings in Minas Tirith. We can read, "Never had any king of the mark such company upon the road as went with Theoden, Thengel's son, to the land of his home. All lords and ladies escorted Theoden, even Galadriel, Celeborn, Elrond and their family and companions, and were there at his funeral and great feast." Denethor's story was quite similar to Theoden's, but the ruling steward took a wrong path. Both died, and both will be remembered quite differently. The funeral of Denethor II is not even mentioned, while Theoden received more respect than any other king of Rohan before. On their way, Aragorn also gave the Druedain their forest as their realm. After the feast, it was time to say goodbye for Arwen, who would return to Gondor, while her family departed to their realms. Quote, "And Arwen Evenstar remained also, and she said farewell to her brethren. None saw her last meeting with Elrond her father, for they went up into the hills, and there spoke long together, and bitter was their parting that should endure beyond the ends of the world." It is not recorded what they said to each other, and it is also hard to imagine, but in the time of victory and celebration, of rebuilding and peace, this must have been a sad hour for them. Arwen will later also note at Aragorn's death, "As wicked fools I scorned them, but I pity them at last, for if this is indeed, as the Eldar say, the gift of the one to men, it is bitter to receive." After the funeral and feast, the guests departed to their homes, except Arwen, who stayed for a while in Edoras. The hobbits, Gandalf, Aragorn, Elrond, Galadriel, Celeborn, Eladan, Elrohir and their companions, but also Gimli and Legolas, traveled together for a long time. First to Hornburg, then to Isengard, where they unfortunately learned that Treebeard let Saruman go. Aragorn received here the keys for Orthanc and departed to Gondor, while Gimli and Legolas travelled to the Entwood. On the Hobbits and company's further journey north, on the west side of the Misty Mountains, they talked about many things. Interestingly, the elves and Gandalf exchanged using what is called Osanwe, which means interchange of thought, so a form of telepathy. We can read, "For they did not move or speak with mouth, looking from mind to mind, and only their shining eyes stirred and kindled as their thoughts went to and fro." There are some information about how this works, and it requires to open the mind or thought. I planned including an explanation here, but it would go far beyond the scope of this video and requires a separate one. Also, telepathy opens all kinds of problems for the plot. You find more about it in the Osanwe Kenta, published, for example, in Nature of Middle-earth. On their way, they also met two beggars. It was Saruman and Grima. The fallen wizard already hinted at some things that might come to pass, but the company just moved on at some point. Around the gates of Moria, Galadriel, Celeborn and their company departed to Lothlorien, and the rest moved on to Rivendell. Bilbo was invited to Minas Tirith as well, but he was too old now to travel so much. They reached Rivendell one day before Bilbo's birthday and celebrated it the other day. They would stay for a few days more and then leave for Bree, where Gandalf wished to see Mr. Butterbur. Before Frodo left, Elrond talked to him in secret. As Frodo stood upon the threshold, Elrond wished him a fair journey and blessed him, and he said, "I think, Frodo, that maybe you will not need to come back, unless you come very soon. For about this time of the year, when the leaves are gold before they fall, look for Bilbo in the woods of the Shire. I shall be with him." These words no one else heard, and Frodo kept them to himself. In Bree they met Butterbur and Bill the Pony, and he told them about unfortunate changes in the area and the Shire. Interestingly, Butterbur now finally understood. "You see, we are not used to such troubles, and the Rangers have all gone away, folk tell me. I don't think we've rightly understood till now what they did for us." The Rangers kept the area safe, dealt with enemies, bandits and wild animals, but only ever earned unfriendliness from the people, including Butterbur. Now that they were gone, they noticed a change. But Gandalf said the king would come to these lands and things would change to the better again. Also, while the travelers were there, Bree would not be disturbed, and people gathered at the Prancing Pony again to listen to the travelers' stories, and looked hopeful into the future when the hobbits and Gandalf left again. Then, close to the Barrow Downs, Gandalf left the hobbits last to visit Tom Bombadil. I think Tolkien wanted to simply take Gandalf out of the equation, and that is why he visits Tom Bombadil, so that the hobbits can now be on their own, showing their character development. When the hobbits had reached the Shire, they found out that some bandits, or ruffians as they were called, led by Lotho, Sackville Baggins and a man called Sharky, took control over the Shire and oppressed the hobbits, corrupting the land and people. Sam saw some of this in the Mirror of Galadriel. But Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin were now too strong and have grown so much that they could deal easily with those oppressing the Shire when they met them in small numbers. They then managed to quickly establish a rebellion of the Shire hobbits who were not happy with the situation, which led to the Battle of Bywater. This is all part of the chapter The Scouring of the Shire, which did not make it into the Peter Jackson films. I think it works well in the books, but it would be strange in the films to have another battle after yet so many ending moments. At the end, we learn that Sharky was Saruman. Sharky seems to be derived from the Orcish word Sharku for old men. He had dealings with Lotho, who he also killed. It's also implied that Grima potentially ate the hobbit. He then took control of the Shire for his revenge. Frodo, confronting him, had still mercy and pity with him, but when Saruman tried to stab Frodo with a knife, which broke on Frodo's mithril coat, things escalated. Grima, who was treated horribly by Saruman and was kicked again by him, then slit the wizard's throat with a hidden knife and was shot by arrows as a result. After that, the hobbits freed the prisoners and rebuilt the Shire. Lobelia Sackville Baggins was also imprisoned due to her opposing the ruffians, even though she was Lotho's mother and already quite old. When she was freed, people cheered, which moved her a lot, and she gave Bag End back to Frodo and even money to help hobbits who were now homeless, and moved herself to the brace girdles of Hardbottle. Sam used the earth and seed of Galadriel, which was a huge blessing for the Shire. The seed was a Malorn. He also married Rose Cotton, and their first child is called Elanor, which is a flower from Lothlorien, or Numenor, originally from Aman. Still, Frodo felt his old wounds at times in the year, especially at their anniversaries, also getting sick at times, and the necklace of Arwen potentially helped him a bit. One day in the year 3rd Age 3021, he asked Sem to come with him on a short journey. When they passed the tree they once hid from the Black Rider, they heard the elves singing again and met Gildor, Elrond, Galadriel, Bilbo and their company, who would now leave Middle-earth to sail to the west continent Aman from Ithlond, the Grey Havens. Elrond wore a mantle of grey and had a star upon his forehead, and a silver harp was in his hand. And upon his finger was a ring of gold with a great blue stone, Vilja, mightiest of the three. It is speculated it is Maglor's harp or a gift of Maglor that Elrond took with him. Maglor was famous for his harp play. I like this theory because the amount of things that Elrond can take with him must have been quite limited, and he was not known as harp player himself, so it must have great personal value for him. Or he needs a new hobby for Aman. We can read in the Silmarillion, for Maglor took pity upon Elros and Elrond, and he cherished them, and love grew after between them, as little might be thought. Further, the Palantir of Elostirion, Círdan, put it aboard Elrond's ship when he left. This would also indicate that they were leaving Middle-earth on multiple ships from the Grey Havens. From there they rode to Mithlond, where Círdan and Gandalf waited. Also Merry and Pippin were there, who were called by Gandalf, so that Sam had not to ride home alone. Then Elrond and Galadriel rode on, for the 3rd Age was over, and the days of the rings were past, and an end was come to the story and song of those times. With their passing, the 3rd Age ends 29th of September 3021, and here ends the story of Elrond Half-Elven, who started as a survivor, became a lawmaster and advisor, had to go to war as soldier and commander, and became a healer after it, becoming the Lord of Imladris, his own realm, and in a way successor of High King Gil-galad. He became husband, father and foster father, one of the wise, and remained one of the chief enemies of Sauron. He almost lost his wife, who had to leave Middle-earth, and later, though he and his allies were victorious, had to endure the parting with his daughter beyond the ends of the world for the great cause. It is not clear what decision his sons Eladan and Elrohir will take, but it is implied after Aragorn's death that no one now dwelt in Imladris anymore. We know that Celeborn, who stayed a bit longer in Middle-earth without Galadriel, lived in Imladris with Eladan and Elrohir, his grandsons, for some time. Due to this, it can be assumed that they all left Middle-earth together at some point as well, to unite with their mother, father and family on the west continent Aman. This is who Elrond was. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this massive Tolkien lore project called Who is Elrond, about one of my favorite side characters in the Lord of the Rings universe. If you liked this video, please press the like button, leave a comment and maybe subscribe. Maybe check out my other videos, recommend me further, and subscribe to the new Lord of the Rings lore channel as well. If you like video games, I also have a games channel. Links are in the description. I started this project in August or September 2021, and now it is finally completed. I can't believe it. It was a massive amount of work to produce these 13 videos, which have a combined length of, I think, around 12 hours. I did a ton of research on this. The script I wrote for this is 155 pages long, plus countless pages of notes. And I also did not use AI. There still might be some mistakes here and there. Let me know in the comments if you notice something or if you have questions. I also want to say a big thank you to all people who supported me and my channel over all these years. Be it by watching my videos, liking them, commenting, being active in the chat during streams and keeping me company in the writing and editing streams, also often helping, or being active in the community in general. Also, thank you to those who supported me with tips, be it over super thanks or Ko-fi, paid memberships on YouTube and Twitch, over Patreon and so on. thank you all for your support. I plan on releasing an all-in-one 12-hour version with some small updates here and there in the next few days too, and maybe that is already the version you are currently watching. All the best to you people. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.